The South African Communist Party is calling on government to urgently address record high unemployment in this country. It follows a three-day Central Committee meeting this weekend, which wrapped up today. The SACP's General-Secretary, Nzimande, says that government also needs to turn around struggling state-owned entities which have collapsed due to years of corruption.
The latest statistics on unemployment further underline the urgency of firmly placing employment creation as a key part of the Reserve Bank mandate. Given our current economic realities, it is also important that we focus on the expansion of the social wage, including advancing towards a comprehensive social security system. Turning around state-owned enterprises as well as expanding and diversifying the publicly owned economic sector should be amongst our key economic transformation priorities. The state has a key role to play in the economy, including through direct participation on behalf of the people as a whole, through, amongst others, well-governed and thriving state-owned enterprises, and through employment creation and direct leadership in economic development and structural transformation.
To unpack that further, we're joined tonight by the SACP's first Deputy Secretary, Mapaila. Mr. Mapaila, good to have you on News at Prime as always. So you are calling as the SACP for the ANC to act quite urgently in addressing the unemployment crisis in this country. That's not a new call. It's been continuing for the better part of the last decade or so. Do you accept that perhaps your alliance partners are completely out of ideas on what to do to address this?
The ideas are on the table. We have tabled these things all the time, alternatives to what can be done to respond to the current socio-economic problems facing our country. But it is particularly the policy unit that is driving the Treasury, which has placed itself as the overarching government policy institution that has driven us into a neoliberal capitalist economic trajectory that is not responding to the needs of the people in the country and is only responding largely to the interest of the IMF and the World Bank in terms of how they think an economy of a country can be handled, despite that many of those economists in those institutions have agreed that their methods for intervention in Africa and the Latin American countries or the third world countries have not worked. So we are calling for government policy to respond to the concrete conditions facing our people and to develop economic policies based on those conditions, not to respond largely to external factors. Those are important to an extent that we deal with an international world, we trade with them and so forth. But a policy framework of any progressive government should be based on the needs of its own population. And that's what we have been calling for all these years. And we're saying in the absence of that, enough measures in the meantime should be reinforced to cushion the poor from deepening crisis of poverty, unemployment, and also inequality that is taking place in our country, even along race and class lines. So that is why we have supported the continuous call for universal basic income grant to be introduced, and the sustainability of these measures, including this 350 rand that is given to the unemployed in our country, to be sustained for as long as these matters have not been tempered with this neoliberal economic trajectory that we are facing today.
Just on that point then, why would Treasury be doing its own thing when the policies of the country are largely influenced by ANC conference policy resolutions, which is your alliance partner?
Well, largely it's lack of discipline in government. You have seen ministers creating their own policies just soon after 2019 elections, 2 months after that, after we've just adopted a manifesto. Minister Tito Mboweni, as Minister of Finance, came with his own policy framework and he threw it into the public for discussion just 2 months after that. And the whole country was shifted to that, and he has been talking about structural reforms. We don't need structural reform, we need structural transformation, which is hugely different from what the IMF and the World Bank are arguing for, as well as the OECD countries are arguing for with regard to interventions in developing economies. So this lack of discipline has really dragged us as an alliance and defocused our attention to wrong debates. For instance, we had to spend sleepless nights responding to this debate, and all of a sudden, this were even in the State of the Nation address of the President, and completely diverting us. And one of the key things that this thing was raising, which we have rejected and we still continue to do so, it's about the role of SOEs, that is state-owned enterprises, which they want to privatize in terms of the framework of this IMF and the World Bank, particularly what they call the network economies under structural reforms. Those things are not helping us. They will never help us, because what it simply does is that it takes away the people's economy and hands it over to private capital. And private capital have no accountability to the well-being of any single South African. They are only accountable to their shareholders, to those that must maximize the sharing of profit of our resources, instead of distributing the resources to the rest of the country, which is faced with poverty. That's the central problem that we are faced with, the ill discipline as well of people that are deployed in government, who are not actually following up the policies of the ruling party.
If I can come in there, that suggests a failure of the broader leadership of the alliance and indeed the ANC, if people who are deployed by those very structures get to government and then shape their own policy, and then even when they do, there are no consequences. So ultimately it is still the fault of the ANC that the ball is not moving forward to the benefit of the millions of unemployed South Africans.
Well, yes and no. Yes, to the extent that we collectively take responsibility for that. At the same time, when the NEC of the ANC takes to make those people account, there's nothing that we can do in the Communist Party, for instance. We can make this public. We have made them public. Even now, we've made it public regarding the current State of the Nation address, for instance, the presentation by Minister Enoch Godongwana in Parliament, which continues on the same economic trajectory. Obviously, the ANC, NEC itself, has to respond to these challenges all the time, particularly when they are raised sharply by their alliance partners. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that the struggle has ended. The struggle continues both inside government, inside the ANC, along class lines, and therefore that is why we must never give up to think that we can turn things around, we can get right formulations, we can get correct leadership to appreciate that this focus currently is not the right focus economically for South Africa, and there's a need for change, and that's what we are arguing for.
But the broader population is running out of that patience with the ANC government, as reflected by the recent election results, be it both at national and at local government level as recently as in 2021, right? You then say in your statement today that you still believe that the ANC-led alliance is the only hope for this country, and it begs the question, how so, when unemployment is soaring, government is struggling to get a handle on crime, leaders are constantly embroiled in allegations of corruption and other unethical behavior. We've got an electricity crisis that's gone on since 2008 that is nowhere near its end. And how then is this alliance still the hope of the country when we're battling on all of these fronts and the party is unable to get a cap on it?
Quite clearly, I think we share some of the concerns with the general population regarding the situation in the country today. The main problem is the capitalist economy. And I think that until society accepts that capitalism is a serious problem in this country, will not be able to turn things around. You can come with policies, and as long as this framework is accepted of capitalism, the big capitalists, the corporations, international corporations, and their local cohorts here in South Africa, they then intimidate government. They say, if you do this, we'll withdraw this and that, and government gets held ransom by these institutions. So we have to appreciate that the fundamental problem in South Africa's economic woes is the capitalist system. And we have to confront this system head on. We have to deal with institutions that capitalism uses in this country to entrench itself, so that we can create a balance of the people's economy, as well as accepting that, yes, we do have a capitalist economy in this country, but we shouldn't allow a rampant capitalism the way it is we are doing, by leaving the tools in our hands to regulate, to stop, or even to discipline capital. We have failed dismally in that space. That we share with you. But nonetheless, the issue is that the capitalist institutions have also not provided alternatives. They've actually created that beyond the ANC, the alternative, it's more capitalism. And we've seen the crisis when such happens. And I think that's why we still believe that if the ANC were to correct itself, were to look deeply inside itself, even in the conduct of its leadership, the kind of caliber of leadership it deploys in different spheres of government, many things will really have to turn around. And they have to turn around quite quickly, and we are willing to work hard for such to happen.
But is the alliance itself and the ANC government not a capitalist tool, given that so many of its leaders are in bed with capitalism and have made millions, while millions of poorer South Africans become poorer by the day?
No. The majority of the ANC members are not capitalists. The majority of the ANC members are working class members. It is perhaps the elitism in leadership, those that have embraced the elitist economic system of capitalism. It is that is primarily the problem. And that is why the renewal of the ANC will have to resolve this kind of question much more thoroughly. And the ANC structures will have to come on board to appreciate that an egalitarian society, that is a society of equals, cannot be based on any system of elitism. Elitism has to be dealt with, and capitalism creates that status of elitism in a country like ours. So the broader issues is that the ANC does have policies on the table that are able to turn things around, and there's no other organization in this country that has put up better policies than what the ANC has at the moment. The problem has been major as a disregard for implementation of critical policies. For instance, like we're raising in our statement, the role of the Reserve Bank in job creation, for instance, and the rest of the financial sector, regulation and control and discipline of the financial sector, because our economy is largely financialized. Those institutions are running amok. In other countries, they are not allowed to do what they are doing in this country. But because of they've been handled by these critical institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the OECD, they continue to follow that particular trajectory. I mean, I was reading yesterday the rating agencies, I think Moody's, praising South Africa's management of its economy. I mean, what nonsense, because it's not related literally to the living conditions of the majority of the people. So the people at the Treasury are pleased by such kind of expressions by Moody's, because they think this will bring investment, and therefore through investment there will be trickle down in the economy, and the people cannot postpone hunger for the trickle down to arrive. So it can't work like that.
We're running out of time,
Mr. Mapaila. At the moment.
We're running out of time. Just on the issue of Treasury, because you've brought it up repeatedly now, there was a lot of criticism of Treasury and its policy positions when Tito Mboweni was finance minister. When he finally left, some said good riddance. Maybe we'll see a change in the stance of Treasury as far as policy is concerned. Enoch Godongwana has been in post now for several months, shall we say. Do you think he's going to continue on that path? And if he does, who's going to rein him in?
We certainly have to, but I think he has to assert himself much more differently. At the moment, with his presentation in Parliament, he hasn't shown a much departure from Tito Mboweni. What is important is that he reaffirmed social security concerns, as well as major other interventions, which we appreciate, but we think he needs to consult more within the alliance, within the progressive forces, than rely exclusively on advices from the IMF and the World Bank through those teams in the Treasury.
Thank you very much, Mapaila from the SACP, for your time tonight on News at Prime.